You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than why didn't they invent mouse-flavoured cat food, that question would have to be, Mark, can you capture the beauty of a waterfall? Today we're going to try and answer that question. So the question obviously is not, can one capture the beauty of a waterfall? I mean,
some really nice detail.
A rock bed underneath.
Ethereal whiteness needed to make a good shot.
It's looking fantastic.
much more, Mark, can you capture the beauty of a waterfall? And that's a fair question. I would have been dragged around the Lake District in North Wales as a kid, and I'm sure there were waterfalls along the path. I don't remember them. I have also been to perhaps one of the most famous waterfalls in the world, Victoria Falls in Livingstone in Africa. And of course, there was no water. So I've had very little actual experience of photographing waterfalls, but I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I think that means I am some kind of an expert. And I think I can hear water. Does this mean we are near our waterfall? We may need to approach quietly so it doesn't run away. So here we are, we have water, we have rocks, not a waterfall, perhaps just a water flow, but definitely the prerequisites based upon my understanding of fluid dynamics. So there, I assume, is the waterfall. We have rocks, we have water, and we have the third prerequisite, gravity. Not that impressive, but pretty nonetheless. The polarizer is actually making a significant difference here. It's certainly cutting off a lot of the glare off the dry rock, giving us some oranges and a bit more green to the shrubbery as well. Let's revel in the mediocrity and take a photo. Just interrupting here before you get too excited by the results. You will have noticed a couple of aspects of my approach to the scene that were atypical, perhaps even ill-considered. The standard model of behavior for waterfall or any landscape photography really is to get there before sunrise, hike for 3 hours, find a location that no one has ever been before, and quietly contemplate the scene, eating an apple and saying, it doesn't get better than this. Well, I can promise you, it really doesn't get better than this, but that's probably not a ringing endorsement. If you've seen any of my previous videos, then you'll be aware that thinking things through really isn't my style. Also, I lack the patience and probably the talent to find that perfect composition and wait for the right conditions to take that one portfolio piece. Firstly, you will have noticed the weather was very pleasant, which makes for a lovely walk, but usually pretty bad photography. And on that level, the blue skies and harsh sunlight did deliver. You'll also notice that every legitimate photographer comes equipped with a sturdy, professional tripod so they can capture the details with razor clarity while creating a beautiful slow shutter waterfall effect to add dynamism to the scene. Well, I don't like tripods. I read the H.G. Wells and John Christopher novels as a kid, and these things are really either sent from Mars to destroy us or sent from hell to punish us. And yes, a kangaroo might use its tail to provide some stability when it's standing, but have you ever noticed that there are no creatures in nature that walk on 3 legs? I'm not referring to an amputated dog here, but the point is that for the most part, 3 legs provides great stability and no mobility. And can you honestly be asked carrying a heavy tripod with you while you're scrambling around wet rocks? Well, you probably can, but I can't. You'll also see that I don't have the agility of a mountain goat, more the fumbling, unsteady gait of a fledgling penguin trying to leave the nest. Despite my lubbily loping around the landscape, unlike a penguin, I do have knees, but I'm buggered if I'm going to get my pants wet or dirty by kneeling. Anyway, enough of my excuses. I had my Nikon Z6 with a 24 to 200mm lens on it, so there should be no issue with the equipment. All the failure was my own. To be fair, I did bring a polarizing filter, and that was a good choice. If you look at a couple of the raw files here, you will notice that when the light was coming in from certain directions, it totally washed out the scene with reflections and glare. That's as uninspiring as it actually looked at the time. The polarizer improved things dramatically. But thank God this is YouTube. Do I dare go so far as to say that I should have brought a tripod? Let's face it, if it was film, I wouldn't have even bothered to try and shoot a scene like this. But I figured, hey, class-leading in-body image stabilization, surely I can reliably shoot for half a second at 200mm. Well, no, you can't. Lesson learned. And let's move on. Let's find one example and try to make something of it. Bearing in mind, this is like picking the tallest jockey in the basketball team. First things first, we need one with not too much camera shake and where the composition doesn't look too random. This is probably the best contender. In terms of composition, it has a decent flow of water leading your eye from the top left to the bottom right of the image, which might not be perfectly balanced, but it looks okay to me. I actually like the water here. I'm not a huge fan of ultra-long exposures, giving that glassy effect. I want to feel the rush of water, but smoothing out the turbulence, and 1/3 of a second or so looks about right here. Normally I'd go on a cropping frenzy now, but honestly I don't think that would improve much here. There's an argument for removing sky from landscape shots, particularly where there's no character to it. Here the blue is a bit distracting, but I think it does give some context to the broader environment, so I'll leave it in. If I tried to crop the top, it wouldn't give much room or any headroom really to the river, so I think that'll do. From here is where we get into the murky world of artistic license. I'm not a dogmatic developer. Raw files are meant to be edited, and while I'm wary of mucking around too much with film scans, that's mainly because you lose the character of the medium when you try to manipulate them too much. With digital, all's fair in love and Lightroom. So I know I want to make sure the sky isn't too distracting. I want to draw the viewer into the main event, which is the waterfall itself. But first of all, I just need to tame this contrast just to get a sense of what's lurking in the shadows and what detail there is in the highlights. Now, this is a judgment call. Go too far and the image starts to look fake, but our eyes have a greater dynamic range than a camera sensor, so let's try and bring out some of those tones. Now to the rest of it. Nikon colors often look a little bit cool to my eyes, so it's not unusual for me to want to warm up the white balance a bit. So this is a start. Now, to go crazy in the HSL panel. I say crazy, but really I just mean mildly eccentric. What I want to achieve is to accentuate the color of the rocks, bringing out some of the iron in the dirt for which Western Australia is so famous. Fun fact, iron ore made up 50%, actually 55% of the value of Western Australian exports last year. I've even visited Nippon Steel in Japan and seen the huge mountains of it, even watched it get made into steel, just so we can buy it back in the end as Toyotas. But I digress. Let's make this dirt redder than the complexion of a blushing British tourist who overdid it on the first day of a summer Kon-Tiki sex holiday. And all the time making sure I don't go too far, even though I know most of the time I'm going too far. Now all this green is looking far too verdant. Let's strip it back, make the leaves a bit more dehydrated, move some of the green hue to the orangey yellow parts of the color wheel. I suppose what I'm trying to achieve is a more painterly look. It sounds spoilt to say it, but one of the problems with modern camera technology is that everything is just a bit too good, too sharp, too clinical anyway. I want to take away some of that and bring in a bit more delicacy to it. Maybe bring up the blacks and muddy them a little bit. Don't want any whites in there. Play around a bit with the texture and clarity. Make the most of the fact that the slow shutter speed means the image isn't ever going to be totally crisp anyway. Now, one of the things that I might consider doing is cloning out the distractions. Basically, my moral compass wavers like an alethiometer on this one. There's a continuum between conceptual art on the one hand and kitchen sink documentary on the other, knowing that even the most realistic approach is always going to be a work of fiction. One rule of thumb is that if something isn't permanent, it can be removed. That's true whether it's a cow on a hillside or a pimple on a chin. I suppose foliage isn't technically permanent, but the problem I have here is that I'm never going to make this a sleek, minimalist photo. So let's leave all of those twigs in for now. What I will do is add a bit of vignetting, maybe using the radial tool so that I can soften those edges. Now to make sure those highlights in the waterfall aren't clipping, maybe just do a bit more of final finessing. And there you have it. A quick look at the before and after. And now I have to go away and leave it for a couple of hours, come back, hate it, and completely redo it again, usually winding back some of my more extravagant edits. Anyway, enough of me twiddling with the tools of editing software. Time to get back into the real world, just knowing that the remainder of the pictures actually had very little to do with reality. So there you go, the full inventory of reasons as to why I'm not a landscape photographer. I did feel that the better pictures were the ones where I wasn't having to interact with nature. I'm much more a creature of the built environment. And maybe you're the same. If you have any sad stories of your own mistakes as you've scrambled through the bleak terrain of photographic foundering, let us know in the comments. And maybe we can learn from each other. Because what is failure but the first step to success? We can all still hope. We can dream. We can all aspire to be that solitary figure that forges through the harsh landscape in the quest for dominance over the primordial elements. I mean, not at the same time, obviously, because then it wouldn't be very solitary. But if there is a lesson for all of us, surely it is that the source of great landscape photography isn't in the gear. A camera has no soul. It's not in our eyes. They are just the foggy fenestra to a greater firmament. Even these sausage-like fingers that can't hold a camera steady are just the external apparatus of a more powerful mechanism. The art of photography is in the heart of the photographer, a deep kernel of creativity that is nurtured and grown through the exercise of our craft. It is not the success that makes us great, it is the failure. The fact that we keep picking up that camera and turning towards the horizon, hoping to capture that magnificent waterfall, or perhaps even one day being privileged enough to marvel at the beauty of life as we train our lenses on a distant polar bear on the ice floe, tearing at the flesh of a baby seal. If I do get there, it won't be because of my success, because it's not the success that matters. It's the trying. And I'm confident for my future as a landscape photographer. I've been called trying many times. Later.